I now want to ask you, turning to, we know the engagement proposal didn't go anywhere in the end. And we're chronologically, we're now getting to the crux of events and when the Emergencies Act was actually decided on. So I know it wasn't decided necessarily on the 13th, but that's the day we're going to talk about. There's some evidence, and I'll ask you if you know about this first. So shortly before, we understand there was an IRG meeting the afternoon of the 13th, followed by a meeting of the full cabinet in the evening at 8:30 p.m. The commission has seen evidence shortly before that 8:30 meeting. Commissioner Lucki sent an email, and let's get the email up. It is ssm.nsc.can 402280. So this is an email. The timestamp on it it's just shortly before 8 o'clock once you do the Greenwich Mean Time adjustment. This is your Chief of Staff, Mike Jones, sending this to you and copied to Deputy Minister Stewart. Evening Minister, responses from the Commissioner below. And we've seen this already in the inquiry, so I won't go through it at length, but there's a sort of a wish list, or these are tools that could be effective. And then at the very bottom of the email, there. Commissioner Lucki says, this said, I am of the view that we have not yet exhausted all available tools that are already available through the existing legislation. There are instances where charges could be laid under existing authorities for various criminal code offenses occurring right now in the context of the protest. The Ontario Provincial Emergencies Act, just enacted, we skipped that in the narrative, but we know that happened February 11th, will also help in providing additional deterrent tools to our existing toolbox. So my first question, Mr. Mendicino, is, did you see this before the cabinet meeting?
I don't recall exactly when I would have seen it. This, as you pointed out, was sent just prior to the commencement of the cabinet meeting. I will say to you, importantly, that a couple things. First, the commissioner did not express that opinion to me at any time directly, and I actually spoke to the commissioner earlier that day on February 13th, and while she did not at all address that last point that you raised in the email, she did call me, and only me, this was a conversation between just her and I, to be clear, to express her very grave concerns about the situation in Coutts. And she underlined for me that the situation in Coutts involved a hardened cell of individuals who were armed to the teeth with lethal firearms, who possessed a willingness to go down with the cause. And the reason why this was such a sensitive conversation was that we had RCMP undercover personnel deployed in the field. And she was justifiably concerned that there not be any leak of this information because lives literally hung in the balance. And for me, this represented far and away the most serious and urgent moment in the blockade to this point in time. And so it also spoke volumes to me about the commissioner's state of mind, which was that we were potentially seeing an escalation of serious violence with the situation in Coutts. And it certainly, I think, was in the broader context of the preponderance of the advice that we were getting from the commissioner at that time as a result of conversations not only in the ERGs about where there were gaps in authorities, in existing authorities, to return public safety to the ground, could not have drawn any other inference that she was supportive, as she later expressed that she was, of the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. This was a singular moment for me in my mind. And it was so urgent that I said to her, well, look, I can't just keep this information to myself. At a minimum, I have to be able to share it with the Prime Minister, which I then subsequently took steps to do. Shortly thereafter, I reached out to Ms. Telford.
Sorry, just to be clear, which information are you talking about there?
About Coutts and about the potential for gun violence and for the loss of life, and the fact that there were RCMP personnel that were in the field, and all of this occurring literally within hours, not even days, of the invocation to the Emergencies Act. I was extremely concerned that this had reached a new height of both urgency and emergency, and so I felt I had a responsibility to let, at a minimum, the Prime Minister know and his staff know, while respecting the operational sensitivity at the most delicate levels to protect the people on the ground. And so I did that. I spoke to Ms. Telford afterwards, where I conveyed to her both the best information that I had at the time around Coutts, and asked her to keep this, to respect, in effect, the Commissioner's request that we treat this information with the utmost sensitivity so that we could ensure that we were keeping people safe. But this was a threshold moment for me. There's no doubt about it.
And that was you had that conversation on the afternoon of the 13th?
That was the same day, yes.
Okay, so just to recap a little bit, you didn't see this email from Commissioner Lucki before the cabinet meeting?
Again, I'm trying very much to reconstruct the sequence of events. Things moved very, very quickly. It literally came in inside of a half hour of the commencement. So I don't want to say definitively I didn't see it. I was much more preoccupied with the actual direct conversation that I had with Commissioner Lucki earlier that day, where she had imparted to me perhaps the most urgent information to date with regards to the occupation and the blockades, and that was a threshold moment.
Okay, fair enough. So if you did see it, it didn't register as much as what she'd said about Coutts, put it that way. In your recollection, was that information put before cabinet? So we know that Commissioner Lucki wasn't called on to speak. Do you recall this being expressed to cabinet that evening?
No.
Okay. And you certainly, obviously...
And I wasn't permitted to share, or I was asked not to share the information about Coutts with anyone else except for the Prime Minister, which I did.
Okay. If you had known this information, and I appreciate you're not entirely sure on whether you saw this information or didn't, would it have changed your mind at all?
I don't think so at that point. My interactions directly with the Commissioner were actually going in the opposite direction, and certainly the fact that that we were on the precipice of engaging in an operation in Coutts where people were armed with a significant number of lethal firearms, where they possessed body armor, where there was intelligence or information that they had ideologically extremist views and symbolism that was attached to the group, that they were prepared to go down with the cause, was a very strong signal to me that the Commissioner was of a heightened concern around the state of affairs. And again, it was consistent with the advice that we were getting contemporaneous to the decision of the invocation of the Emergencies Act around tools to address the gaps that existed. So, you know, the need to deploy RCMP officers, the need to procure essential services, importantly, the need to declare no-go zones or prohibition of assemblies. Let me just say on that last point that I wasn't just hearing about that from the RCMP. The CBSA had briefed cabinet on at least one occasion for sure, if not more, about their explicit concerns about the lack of their authority and jurisdiction to clear roads on the way to the border. And so, you know, all of those powers were subsequently included in the declaration and the regulations under the Emergencies Act.